Good afternoon and welcome to this presentation from the archives of St. Joseph's Oratory of Mont-Royal in Montréal, Quebec. My name is David Bureau and I am the archivist for the Oratory. To make this presentation enjoyable for everyone, we have turned off your microphones. Please feel free to ask questions using the chat feature. It is a pleasure to share with you a few words about the story of the workers who built the oratory. Too often we overlook the men and women who helped shape the oratory into the place we know today. The building itself is so striking that we sometimes forget the human effort behind it, the years of hard work, the skills, and the dedication it took to bring it to life. So today's presentation is meant to bring them back into the spotlight. Now, I won't be covering every detail of the construction. Think of this more as a walk through work site that has been active for over 120 years. We'll look at a few of the trades involved in its construction and explore some of the major projects that helped shape the largest shrine in the world dedicated to Saint Joseph. So put on your hard hat and lace up your work boots. Let's step into the site together. Saint Joseph is the patron of workers that we know, especially those in trades like carpentry, woodworking, masonry, bricklaying, but many others too. In 1955, Pope Pius XII established the Feast of Saint Joseph the Worker to honor the Christian commitment to work and devotion to Saint Joseph. Pope Saint John XXIII saw this liturgical celebration as a reminder that the realities of human life are deeply connected to the value of work. The Church seeks to recognize the great dignity of workers and encourage them to make their work a powerful means of personal growth and merit. In 1896, Collège Notre-Dame purchased the land where the oratory now stands. The authorities aimed to secure the area surrounding the private school. While students and religious members often walked the grounds, it was the construction of the first chapel, the picture on your right, but especially the expansions after 1908 that transformed the site into a place of pilgrimage. When Brother André was appointed guardian of the shrine in 1909, he moved into the small pavilion on the left on the picture near the chapel. With the arrival of the first chaplain, Father Adolphe Clément, the oratory began its activities as we know them today. The monastery for the permanent religious community was built in 1912. By the following year, 1913, the demand for a larger church had already emerged, supported by $53,000 available in funds. Land surveying work began shortly after. Brother André personally hired the workers to build the first road for vehicles. 6 or 7 earth workers carried out this work using dynamite. They were also employed for the excavation of the Christ Church foundations, which began around 1915. Father Auguste Dion, the rector of the oratory in 1912, recounts these works in the Oratory Chronicles. I quote, "The blasts that shattered sections of rock to make way for the great crypt church exploded like thunder and machine gun fire one after another. The rather irritating music of the 3 pneumatic drills biting and screeching into the solid red stone could have disturbed the spirit of prayer. And yet, countless pilgrims continued to move through the area, climbing up and down the dusty, rocky hillsides. Massive amounts of work were used to shape the terraces in front of the crypt church, as you can see on your left. Noisy excavations resumed in October 1922, this time for the foundations of the future basilica, the picture on your right. The work continued until 1924. Now, who were the trade people of those early construction years? To understand their work, let's look at the materials they shaped: wood, steel, concrete, and stone. The rest of our tour will not follow always a chronological order. We will cover the main features of the principal building: the chapel, 1904 till 1913, the crypt, 1915 to 1917, and the basilica, 1924 until 1938. So let's start with the primitive chapel. The primitive chapel, the very first chapel, was the oratory's earliest wooden structure. It is the structure you can see on the picture in the center and the right of your screen. It was built by Brother Abondius Pichet, a skilled carpenter born in 1862, who worked at the Collège Notre-Dame. He began the construction on July 28, 1904, and completed the project by mid-October of the same year. The chapel measured 18 feet long by 16 feet wide and stood 25 feet high. It was a very simple structure, but Brother Abondius covered both the interior and exterior with embossed metal sheet. There was no steeple and no windows, just frosted glass panes that allowed a bit of light to enter. In any case, masses were celebrated outdoors when weather permitted. 2 rows of benches, as you can see, were placed between the rock and the chapel doors. Let's hear what Brother Abondius had to say about his work. Quote, "I worked on the first chapel. I was the collège laboureur. The superior asked me to build the chapel. I built it out of spruce. The altar was to be made of pine. I was pretty much alone in building the chapel. Brother André came to see the construction, but he trusted us quite a bit. Brother André was hardworking. I heard that no one had ever seen him lose his patience. I think Brother André was made for his mission. The little chapel was built with the help of private donations. The construction took about 7 to 10 days of free time. Brother André was convinced that the chapel needed to be enlarged, but he was happy that it was a start," end quote. At the end of the project, a surplus of $100 remained, which Brother André gave back to the community, to the congregation of the Holy Cross. A miracle is associated with the construction of this chapel. A mason named Calixte Richard suffered from a stomach tumor and came to Brother André seeking help. In exchange for healing, he promised to help with the chapel's construction. Well, he was healed, and not only did he help with the chapel, but he also found workers for the next phase of the work. To reach the chapel, another carpenter, Brother Jules, was asked to build a wooden staircase of 140 steps in the spring of 1909. He was assisted by a helper whose name, sadly, has been lost to history. The oratory quickly attracted many pilgrims. Its chapel was expanded 3 times. The first expansion came around 1907 when a roof was added to provide shelter from the rain. To ensure worship could continue year-round, the following year, 1908, they hired contractor Alfred Rousseau, who built the nave by enclosing the temporary shelter. That would be the picture on your left. He also added a wide railing to accommodate a harmonium and created space inside for liturgical vestment. Oh, could you please turn off your... Thank you. The new chapel was inaugurated in November 1908. It is the picture you can see on your left. Through this period of construction from 1908 to 1914, the work of the laborers is recorded in account books, chronicles, and the Annals of Saint Joseph. The picture you see on your right is the final expansion in 1912, when the nave was extended to 100 feet in length. It goes without saying that wood was also essential for the framework, for formwork of all the major constructions to come. The crypt church started in 1915, the foundations of the Basilica beginning in 1924, as you can see on the picture, and of course, the dome's formwork in 1937. The oratory's major buildings were constructed at a time when the world events were causing upheaval across the globe, which significantly slowed down construction work. These events included World War I, the economic crisis of 1929, and World War II. During those times, resources became very scarce. A large-scale project such as the oratory required very tight management of expenses and resources. Throughout these years, pilgrims and friends of Brother André were important pillars for the construction process. It goes without, in 1915, Ulrich Boileau and Brothers Company, contractors from Montreal, were awarded the contract to build the crypt church. The cost of construction reached $175,000, not including the interior furnishings, which were estimated at an additional $30,000. So for a total of $500,000. Nearly a decade later, in 1924, the same family-run company was entrusted with the construction of the basilica itself. Ulrich Boileau erected a steel framework to support the crypt church. On May 14, 1916, during the cornerstone blessing ceremony, the massive steel arches were fully visible. In fact, the celebration was held outdoors, right beneath the imposing metal structure, as you can see on the picture. Given the expertise of the workers who had built the massive steel arches and were working for the Phoenix Bridge Ironworks Limited, the oratory entrusted them with the installation of the statue of Saint Joseph in the crypt church on December 6, 1917. It is the same statue that we can still see today at the oratory's crypt church. The annals recount that the industrious workers had already begun setting up the sturdy scaffolding and chains in the heart of the shrine, all necessary to carefully lower the statue of Saint Joseph into place above the center altar. Steel became the backbone of the basilica's construction, as you can see on this picture. From 1926 to 1937, even as progress slowed and sometimes came to a standstill due to financial hardship, Dominion Bridge Company and their consulting engineer, Ernest Loignon, continued assembling the building's steel structure. Over the years, several architects took turns shaping the vision, each one inheriting plans already in motion. Ulrich Boileau's company remained at the helm of construction until its closure in 1943. Work resumed under a new contractor, Héroux and Robert, in 1945. Until now, the workers have appeared only rarely in photographs. With the construction of the basilica, the granite walls, and the concrete structure, they increasingly appear in the construction site photographs. Often, these workers were not employees of the oratory itself. They came from construction firms contracted for specific projects. Their names were seldom recorded, but the list dated 1937 gives us a rare glimpse into some names, a few trades, and fragments of their identities. As the 1930s drew to a close, the oratory entered a period of intense construction. The will to see the basilica completed was strong, not only among the priests and pilgrims who had nurtured the project from the beginning, but also within the leadership of the Congregation of Holy Cross. There were mounting concerns that delays might lead to insurmountable debt. While progress had resumed steadily after 1934, it was the death of Brother André in January 1937 that brought a renewed sense of momentum. From that moment on, the pace of construction picked up dramatically. The site buzzed with activity. Workers from dozens of companies like Silver Granite, Gunite and Waterproofing Limited, Otis Elevator, Montreal Architectural Iron Works labored day after day. One of the most spectacular phases, the rising granite walls. The stone, a beautiful gray granite, came from Lac Drolet in the Lac Mégantic region in the eastern townships. As early as 1930, the construction was underway on the lower floors of the basilica. Granite deliveries came one after another, quickly filling the area around the site. The surroundings were cluttered with stones, blocks, and heavy machinery, all set to feed the steady rhythm of the work. Masons, roofers, construction laborers, each playing their part. We now come to a very important aspect of the construction of the basilica, the dome. A few words to say that its construction was quite eventful. The death of the architect Alphonse Venn before the project was completed led the oratory authorities to terminate the contract with his firm and thus abandon the original design of the dome, which was much more like the dome that you can see at Église Sacré-Cœur in Paris, or even the Senate Dome in the United States. Another architect was hired, the monk Dom Paul Bello, who gave the dome the shape we know today. The dome is the signature of the oratory's silhouette. It was still just a dream when Brother André died. It wasn't until the fall of 1937 that the immense wooden framework needed to pour its concrete shell began to take its shape. It is the structure you see now on your screen. For months, the Congregation of Holy Cross relied its community, calling on readers of the Oratories magazine, to help fund this final phase. It was increasingly urgent to protect the basilica, which had long stood open to the weather without having a roof. And every winter, the risk of damage grew more serious. It may come to a surprise to you, but the oratory doesn't have just one dome. It has two. The majestic copper-covered dome, seen from miles away, is only the outer shell. Inside it, there is another dome, smaller but no less impressive. It is the one visible to visitors standing beneath it in the basilica, where inside. Between the two, a vast echoing void. At the top of the inner dome, a steel framework rises to the lantern perched atop the outer dome. Both were built in solid concrete. From October 18 to 24, 1937, workers constructed the wooden formwork that would hold the concrete for the oratory's main dome, the one that we can see from the outside. This was a major challenge, as it was vital not to weaken the concrete. To ensure this, the engineer Maxime Caillou planned one single continuous pour. The machines would pump the liquid concrete to the top of the dome, allowing it to flow down to the base without interruption. Multiple layers had to be avoided. The aim was to create a continuous shell. So the operation began on November 6, 1937, and lasted 10 days to end in November 15, 1937. Teams of workers and Holy Cross brothers rotated in shifts to supervise the flow, maintaining the right pressure and ensuring the temperature of the hoses to remain constant. Even a slight drop in temperature could cause the concrete to cool and harden prematurely, blocking the lines. The completion of the basilica does not mean that the oratory is operational yet. There was still much work to be done, including the Gardens of the Way of the Cross and the votive chapel. The oratory will not be truthfully finished until around 1967, when the decoration and layout of the basilica will be completed. We will now leave the construction site aside and take a look at the maintenance and daily operation of the oratory. What we're about to present relates to the situation of the oratory in the early 1960s. It is time to discuss the presence of lay people in more detail. Although we do know that as early as 1908, a man who was not a member of the clergy, Mr. Joseph Savage, was working on the maintenance at the oratory. Up until the construction of the basilica in 1938, most labor was supplied by general contractors. But once the building was completed, the oratory's rectors increasingly relied on their fellow Holy Cross brothers to handle maintenance and upkeep of the site. Faced with many sheer scale of the task, it soon became necessary to reinforce the religious workforce with lay employees, including increasingly lay women. By the 1950s, the number of employees had grown to nearly 200 people. Let's start with the skilled trades. In 1959, a report lists the following positions at the oratory: 4 electricians, 4 plumbers, 2 tinsmiths, 5 carpenters, 3 heating technicians, 4 painters, 1 mason, and 1 mechanic. By 1958, around 60 women were employed in the oratory's general secretariat. To heat the vast building, a boiler house was built at the foot of the mountain and connected to the shrine by a tunnel. Nearly 235,000 gallons of fuel were used each year for heating. The regulation of the boilers was entrusted to Brother Louis-Joseph Thibault, the man you can see on the right of your screen, and who had also been one of the last to oversee the dome's concrete pour back in November 1937. Many mechanical and plumbing components were manufactured at the oratory by the brothers themselves. The plumbers were responsible for maintaining 30 refrigeration units and nearly 200 mechanical ventilation systems throughout the site. Plumbing and heating naturally went hand in hand, especially with the installation of the Basilica's radiant floor heating system. It is the drawing you see on your screen now. The black lines that you see, they are actually the system's heating for the inside of the basilica. This is the plumbing that you cannot see because it's all underneath the floor of the basilica. It was quite innovative for its time, and this system ensured a comfortable warmth to pilgrims throughout the winter months. It was also an aesthetic choice, eliminating the need for bulky radiators along the walls. The shrine used some 6,000 light bulbs, and it's up to the electricians to keep them all in working order. Their responsibilities included ensuring proper lighting in all interior spaces, like the chapel, the crypt church, the basilica, the offices, the corridors, the restrooms, the museum, as well as overseeing the nighttime illumination of the basilica itself. And on the picture on your right, you can see that the same man who was responsible for the electricity was also Brother Louis-Joseph Thibault, who we have just met a few pictures ago, responsible for the heating of the basilica. Maintenance also includes the care of the oratory's outdoor spaces, flower beds, walkways, the garden of the Way of the Cross, trees, and landscapings, all tended during the warmer months. And the same holds true in winter. The oratory's mission never pauses. It must remain accessible at all times, no matter the challenges posed by the weather. A technical supervisor oversees all indoor and outdoor operations and relies on a team of about 25 people who make up the oratory's maintenance staff. There is also a dedicated night crew. Carpenters, painters, mechanics, brothers and lay people worked behind the scenes to ensure that St. Joseph Oratory remains functional and running smoothly every single day. We've talked mostly about men up so far. We haven't met a lot of women workers, but this is about to change. Now, of course, we have to keep in mind that Quebec society at that time did not leave so much room for women in the labor market. At the Oratory, this reality is clearly visible in the number of women hired and their tasks. However, women's participation in the life of the Oratory happened more or less quickly than expected. Some of them were even early workers, as we will see in a moment. There were no female plumbers, electricians, or painters, but women have been part of life at the Oratory for much longer than one might think. Though they didn't hold traditional skilled trades, many were professionals in their own right, especially in supporting the works of the priests. The first women to work at the Oratory were religious sisters, all from the same well-known congregation, the Little Sisters of the Holy Family, founded by Sainte Mother Marie-Léonie Paradis. We know that they arrived at the Oratory in 1912 and served until 1997. While we do not know the full details of their working conditions, they were harsh. Records show that in 1944, each sister received a very little salary of $2 per month. By March 1954, at least 11 Little Sisters were present, responsible for sewing, meal preparation, and secretarial work, tasks that freed the priests to focus on their Eucharistic ministry. And I'm going to read for you now a quote from the 1950s, from the 1920s, in which the redactor-in-chief for the Oratories magazine sends his best wishes and thankful to the Little Sisters who work at the Oratory. I quote, "Since the inauguration of the presbytery, the Little Sisters of the Holy Family have been responsible for the kitchen, the maintenance of the religious house, and the sanctuary. They bring a dedication, delicacy, and regularity known only to God. The sisters contribute to the service of external worship with astonishing self-sacrifice and very real success. Decoration, maintenance, and cleanliness are often the subject of very flattering comments from the Oratory administration, but these must be credited to this deserving congregation." Women began to play a significant role at the Oratory with the opening of the General Secretariat in 1950s. 60 employees, most of them women, worked in this building annexed to the crypt church on the east side of the shrine. The woman handled all tasks related to mail, 300,000 letters annually, as well as the reception and shipping for the gift shops. But their primary responsibility was the daily updating of the general file. This essential tool for the Oratory's operations contained all the information and contact details for donors and magazine subscribers also, which reach 150,000 French-speaking and 25,000 English-speaking. They were also responsible for shop orders and the fundraising campaigns for the associates of Brother André. And what about accidents on the construction sites? Unfortunately, there were a few. Some were narrowly avoided, so narrowly, in fact, that writers of the time did not hesitate to speak of a miracle. In 1911, for example, lightning struck the chapel's new steeple while workers were on it. Despite the violence of the impact, none of the workers were injured. But one tragedy left a deep mark on the oratory's history. On June 3, 1938, construction was underway high above ground to build the basilica's turrets. 4 young workers stepped onto a construction hoist already loaded with stones, wooden beams, and tools. As it rose, the platform suddenly broke free and plummeted more than 210 feet to the ground. There were no survivors. The victims, Jean-Marie Desjardins, André Rivet, Rémy Descoteaux, and Paul Lauzon, were all from Montreal and died on site. The event sent shockwaves through the community. It left such a lasting impression that the deputy coroner of the province of Quebec, Dr. Pierre Hébert, and the coroner's court jury issued a clear recommendation that from that day forward, no one was to ride a hoist intended for materials, a recommendation that is still going on to this day. I admit it is a bit a somber way to conclude what has been otherwise a story of remarkable achievements. But as much as we celebrate the incredible work of those men and women who built the oratory, we must also remember that the tragedies that came with its construction. We owe this to the families and the descendants of everyone who played a part in creating this one-of-a-kind basilica. Today, the oratory is continuing to welcome pilgrims seeking comfort and guidance from Saint Joseph and Saint Brother André. It also opens its doors to many who come in search of new opportunities, those who are unemployed, immigrants, young people standing at life's crossroads. We keep them in our prayers with Saint Joseph and Saint Brother André. The workers of the oratory left us with a magnificent shrine. There's no doubt about that. But it is now up to us, to each of us, to share the true meaning for future generations. More than an architectural marvel or a tribute to human genius, St. Joseph's Oratory is a work of faith and unconditional welcome. It is the memory of this sacred place that we must try to preserve to the best of our ability. The oratory stands as a powerful symbol of the people's love for Saint Joseph, Saint Brother André, and Saint Joseph, protector of the Holy Family, patron of Canada, and patrons of workers everywhere. Thank you very much. We will now take a few minutes to answer some of your questions. I remind you that if you'd like to ask a question, you can use the chat in the toolbar. So let me see what we have now. Someone asked, how many employees do we need today at the oratory? Well, in 2025, during summertime, we're around 200 employees. And in these 200 employees, we include administration, human resources, pastoral resources, priests and brothers of the Holy Cross. We also include staff at the boutique, at the shop, the cafeteria, the museum, the archive, and of course the maintenance in and outside of the buildings. Year round, we're about 175 employees. So we do have a little bit more in summertime, especially to take care of the outside of the basilica and of the buildings. There are about 20 employees, plumber, carpenter, that are in charge of the maintenance year round at the oratory. And the other jobs are there to making sure that pilgrims are well received and ready to visit the oratory, to make sure that the oratory is ready to have pilgrims visiting the place. Someone asked about the way of the Garden of the Cross. The Garden of the Cross is also a big construction. I left it aside because I really wanted to work on the buildings themselves, but let's take just a few seconds to talk about the Garden of the Cross. So the Way of the Cross was an idea that was already there in the 1930s, but the construction really took the speed needed in the early 1940s. So the oratory hired architectural landscape architect Frédéric Todd in 1942. If you're from the region of Montreal, it might be a name that you have heard before because he was responsible for the management of Parc du Mont-Royal, Mont-Royal Park. Frédéric Todd was engaged in 1942, so they began the planning of the area, which needed to be laid down, which needed to be put at an even ground and to make paths along the way. In 1945, the oratory hired the sculptor Louis Parent in order to make the monumental statues that you can see in the Way of the Cross, in the Garden of the Cross. And that's when the time began to be, that's when work began to take a lot of time, because Louis Parent and the completion of the Way of the Cross were only done in the late 1950s, early 1960s, just before the inauguration of the Basilica in 67. So put all together, it took about 18 years to get the Garden of the Way of the Cross as we can see it today. Now, someone also asked if there were people giving their time to help build the oratory in those years. Well, we do know that people were interested in giving time. We do have people now who are coming to the oratory for helping, but things changed a lot since the beginning of the oratory in 1904. We do have now laws and professions that have very strict rules, so we cannot have people helping maintaining the site. But in 1904, we do have traces of people who were coming and giving their time and trades and their skills to help with the construction of the buildings. But what is more striking is not that much that people gave their time, but that they gave materials to help build the chapel. There is this anecdote, for example, in 1904, early in the 1900s, as Saint Brother André was looking for wood to build the first chapel, there was this young boy who was sick and wanted to take a few days out of the college to go see his parents. He asked the Collège Supérieur if he was allowed to leave, but unfortunately, the superior refused. So the little boy went to Brother André and said, Brother André, if you can convince the superior to let me go to my family's reunion, I will find you wood. I will ask my father not to give you money for the construction of the chapel, but I will ask him to give you the wood you need to build this chapel. And somehow, Brother André makes it happen. He gets the young boy back to his family for a few days, and when the boys come back with his father, the father agrees to give the wood for the construction of the chapel. Now that happens just a few years before the construction of the chapel in 1904, but we do know that the same kid in 1906 asked his father again, this time for the wooden staircase to reach the chapel. So twice did this young boy help Brother André with his father for the construction. So we do see those acts from time to time. It's either wood or paint, or people were giving a lot of musical instruments, chairs, and of course giving money so that the church, the crypt church or the chapel could have all the materials, liturgical materials they needed for the completion of the oratory. Now, if you have more questions on the construction, or if you'd like to dig more on the workers that have been here at the oratory, I would suggest you either to go have a look at our website on the blog, Oratory's blog. You will find pieces of history here and there. I do write from time to time on the Oratory's blog about this subject, or you can find our coordinates at Centre d'Archives et Documentation Roland Gauthier, Oratory's Archive Center, and you can find my phone number and my email address, and it will always be a pleasure to help you find more information on the oratory. And that's what concludes this presentation today. I want to thank you all very much for your time and your patience and your interest, and I wish you a very good afternoon. Thank you very much.